Hello, grade sevens. Welcome to Home-Based Learning Lesson 7, or no, Lesson 10. For today, we are going to be looking at Africa, an overview, very brief overview of the colonization of Africa. I'm not going to get very in-depth here because you will be doing a project where you will be researching and going deeper into the history, the ideas, the reason behind it all. That's all in the next video that you will have as part of this home-based learning process. You can find Africa. I remember you guys did the Africa test earlier this year. We did the Africa project on life expectancy, NGOs, things like that earlier when we were studying geography. But now we're studying and looking at the colonization of Africa, how it happened, when it started, and some of the the big things to spur your interest. So Africa, right, is the second largest continent in the world. It is second to only Asia. Right below the Mediterranean, it is right between the Indian and the Atlantic Oceans. Many interesting stories have come from there. You can find a lot of African history. Ethiopia, Egypt, South Africa, they're just loaded with history. Good stories. I hope you find them in your research. So let's get into it. The beginnings. This is basically up until the 1700s, but starting as early as the 1500s, the first major player of all the countries to go and begin the colonization, I would say more interaction with Africa would be the Portuguese. Their interest was not Africa, except for they were interested in getting around it, and so uh, they had stops along the way. They started almost like trading posts, forts along the coast as they kind of did the hippity hoppity all the way to India and China. The India and China were the places everybody was trying to get early on. It's the place of the spices. They had the things people wanted on the other side of the world. The Silk Road costed a lot of money, hard to get across those mountains and the deserts, and so easier to sail a boat full of stuff than to try bring it by horseback or camel or some other way. So they had to go around. So really, there's Portuguese being spoken in places like Mozambique, I think Madagascar. There's other places, but um, this is the beginning of it, and it was not to colonize necessarily, but to get to a colony in India and China. The Dutch, they had their colonies in the Indies, the Dutch East Indies. They established a colony in South Africa, one of the few ones to be established where basically white people were able to live, survive, and thrive there. They are known as the Boers. Later on, you can learn about the Boer War and how when the British started taking over the South Africa, the Dutch, who had been there for a long time, were basically illegals. There's a war between the Dutch and the Boers, and there's a lot of other stories coming out of there. There's actually movies about it. If you want, you can watch them. Not completely accurate, but gives you a little bit of picture what Africa's like. Um, so the Dutch had colonies earlier than most countries in Africa. The Ottoman Empire, I guess you could call, I put this in here because it is kind of colonization. However, it wasn't so much go someplace and start a colony, it was more through the ideology which would bring about World War One, expansion of borders. And so they weren't setting up colonies, they were just expanding their borders through North Africa's north of the Sahara Desert, basically, all along the coast. Egypt was a part of it. That was early. As time went on, countries would try to colonize Africa. However, there's a whole bunch of diseases, native people there. You basically the story was try to explore Africa and you're signing your own death wish. Some people, there's journals of missionaries who went into the Congo much later in Belgium, but just the stories of crazy animals, jungles, and disease that makes your skin crawl. So there are definitely primary sources about colonization in Africa. However, none of them would ever paint it as successful, especially for well, um, make it as there's no Lewis and Clark stories. There's no Voyager, like the people who went across and mapped it all, discovered it all, let other people come and see it, met the natives and worked with them to explore it. It was mostly up the Nile, up in the Congo, northern Africa, a little bit in southern. It's a big place and it's hard to explore on foot. However, I'm rambling. I don't want to do that. So we talked about this earlier when we were discussing the Americas and how they were relying upon slaves from Africa. So this was basically the need from African people. They had colonies, forts, trading in Africa for the purpose of bringing slaves to the Americas. It was a supply chain of a resource that they wanted, which was people of a certain skin color who couldn't run away and could work hard. And the Muslim kings from the north would sell slaves, usually through battle taken, those kinds of things. Sell them, have them shipped over, where they would live out the rest of their lives as slaves, working in plantations and who knows what else. Um, Basically, all attempts of exploration in the 1500s were um, like they just failed. There was a lot of diseases they weren't used to. The horses would die. They had the technological advantage, but it didn't help you when you couldn't stay alive. So no one really went to Africa. So they started going India, China, well, the Australias, all the way that area into the Americas, and the the biggest thing that it was basically ports along the ocean where, as they were sailing to India and China, they could fill up with bananas, water, resupply their boats, and continue on their way. Maybe if there's a storm, harbor there for a while. Um, we talked about that colonization. We have next, after a long time though, a while, the world's ran out of land to colonize. So the Americas are gone, Australia's gone, India's given back, China is um, becoming their own. Japan doesn't really want anything to do with colonization. They're going to start doing the imperialism expansion soon. And so, without land, remember that world wealth of pie, there's only so much wealth in this world, and we need to get as much as we can for our beloved country. Started to take its aim, started focusing and targeting Africa. So as technological things increased, the abilities to get there faster, immunities, setting up colonies, learning from the people, language helped a lot. They started to be able to colonize parts of Africa and began the expansion of Europeans into Africa. And um, it became a competition. No one wanted to be outdone by the others, and so it became the scramble for Africa. Every kingdom, even Belgium, the smallest little one you could ever hear of in the Netherlands or in Europe, had a large colony in the Congo, which was like somebody says like 100 times bigger than their actual country. They had a colony, which is the same as England, I guess. But they're sending all their resources of expansion to Africa to get as much of it as they can before somebody else takes it. And so it's this scramble for Africa. It's not scrambling eggs. It's just people sporadically running as fast as they can, basically. Um, English was the strongest. They they had the resources, they had the networking, they had the experience, the power, the military to do it. And so you will see from or later on in your project how much control the English and the French had in Africa, how it shifted powers. But there were small countries like the Netherlands and Belgium who had the parts of Africa as colonies, right? We heard about how the Boers lost out to the English. That's the English being bullies. Belgium, actually, the government took it from King Leopold, the guy who owned it. Interesting stories you'll find out about them. However, Germany is a new country, the formation of all these Prussian and Austrian kingdoms into one, and they are stuck in Europe and they want to grow, and they are um, getting a little anxious. They can't expand their beloved fatherland. I guess that's the Netherlands thing, or that's later on, not the Netherlands. And they're getting antsy. So really, this idea of expansion, we need more, is a signs of things to come in World War I, or what brought it on. However, Germany wanted more, which brings us to the next major thing that you would need to know, and that's the Berlin Conference in 1884. There's another Berlin Conference, but you don't need to worry about that one. Um, to summarize it within the length of the video time that I have, which isn't very much, you it's basically like the entire school being divided up by a few people who don't even go to the school, right? Africa was a continent. The Berlin Conference happened in Berlin, which was Europe, by European powers. There's no Africans present, and during that time, they put borders along rivers and other things, and gave lands to different people. This is what our simulation would have focused on. This period in history, where leading up to the scramble for Africa, the Berlin Conference, and then the Berlin Conference, how that changed right up to World War One through a game of combination of Risk, Settlers of Catan, Sodbusters, Axis and Allies, Monopoly, and it would have been great, I promise, but it was about how this continent was cut up, and it was so Germany could have some land. They actually did receive something out of it, which they wanted, making them an imperial country, which also headed them down the road towards World War One. However, there were no Africans present. The entire continent of Africa was divvied up by people who didn't live there, who weren't natives, by Europeans, and that is the standard. And right, we watched that map. It took almost 100 years for that Berlin Conference to be dismantled, and you studied the the life expectancy in Africa, and really that can be attributed to colonization because none of the resources were being used to develop Africa. None of it was being used to invest in education. Cultures were killed, those kinds of things. And really, this conference is really the killing point of what killed Africa for many years. Um, this is a slide I ended in there. So pre-World War One, with the Berlin Conference, everyone became more ambitious in Africa. It heightened up everyone's energy. They started pouring more resources into it, like railroads, things like that, and developing an economy around it. And as it grew, there's still tension, lots of ambition, but countries, I should say, started to take sides. Like we have borders that we're friendly with, but we don't want Germany expanding here. And so it led to a buildup of weapons, an ability to manufacture more by by these smaller countries. A country like Germany, which was young, all was um, base felt locked in, and so they were ready to go. And the balance of the world was teetering, and it just took a little bit for it to crumble. And we learned about that, or you will learn about that in the coming years after World War One. But this is the situation. There's a lot more that led to World War One. This is just the part that was happening in Africa before World War One. I hope you enjoy. There will be another video later. As always, I hope you have a great day. Stay alive, stay safe in this time. Praying for you. If you liked this video, you can always watch it again. Or, I don't know, they always say in YouTube videos, hit like and subscribe, and then you'll be my best friend or something. It's up to you. Have a great